Hi everybody, I know it's been a while since I've posted anything. I want to talk about my third marriage. I unknowingly married a child molester, and it started out with him inappropriately touching my kids. Well, I'll back up a little bit, because right after we got married, he actually told me that that his ex-girlfriend left him while he was at work one day and took all of her stuff. And I said, well, why'd she leave you? And he said he didn't know. But to me, women who have been abused leave their husbands, if they're smart, while they're at work. That's really the only time you have to get away from them. And he was a truck driver, so he was far enough away that even though he came home every night, he was far enough away, like 4 or 5 hours away, that you had time to pack up and get away. So anyway, and then so we had been married for maybe 6 months or a year, I don't know. And he inappropriately touched my son, and then my daughter was laying on the floor watching TV on her side, and he laid down behind her and he pulled her in to right up next to him with her butt in his groin. And I mean, it was a way that he would hold me in bed, not a 10-year-old child. And I didn't like it. And so I had told him, you can't be touching my kids this way. And I really reamed him a new one. And then I tried to let it go. And then it wasn't long after that, I don't know, a year or so, I was now pregnant with his child. And as soon as he got home from work one day, I had been doing daycare out of the house, and I asked him to go change the diaper of the 6-month-old that I was doing daycare for, and because I was trying to finish up dinner. And so he said sure, and he went in there, and I figured it'd be good practice for him, because we're going to be having a baby soon, and this might have been the very first diaper he ever changed. I don't know, but so after about 5 minutes, I went in there, and his face was right in her groin. I mean, right in there. Not 10 inches away, it was right in there. And anyway, I screamed, "What are you doing?" And he just jumped up, and he's like, I'm just trying to make sure she's clean." And I said, "Just get out of here, I'll finish it." And I knew right then and there that there was something wrong with this guy. And so I ended up having his baby. And after I'm going to back up. I think I don't think she was born yet. I can't remember if it was before she was born or after she was born, but we went to marriage counseling. And because I was having a really hard time getting over it, because I'm a survivor of child molestation myself. So I just was having a really hard time putting it out of my head. And anyway, we went to see this therapist, and the therapist said, "I want to see you two together." He said, "But I also want to see your husband by himself," because my husband admitted to the therapist what he had done to everything I just mentioned. And so the therapist thought that was quite strange. So that went on for a little while. And the timeline is, my timeline might be off a little bit, but I know that my daughter was about a year old when I finally left him, because I couldn't get it out of my head. I was terrified of what he might do, to our daughter. And so I left him. And then, of course, he ended up getting every weekend visitation. And at first I didn't have a problem with it. I wanted her to know her father. And he I don't know what exactly he was doing at the time, but as time went on, she would come home and just act weird. She like stood between these two kitchen cupboards, and she opened the doors and she stood in there, and then she closed the doors around her and started swaying back and forth, saying, "I'm the ugly maker man." Yeah, I think that's what she said. And I'm like, "What is that?" She says, "I'm the ugly maker man." And I just let it go because I didn't want to press her. And by this time, she was almost 2 years old. And she was very intelligent. She was reading at 2 years old. And so she would do things like at bath time. You know, I would give her a bath and then wrap the towel around her and take her to her room and to, get her dressed. And she would come out with the towel on, and my two older kids are sitting in the living room, and she would rip the towel off, grab her groin area and pull up on it with her legs spread. And I'm like, "What are you doing? Get in there and get some clothes on." And she was just acting really strange. And so I eventually took her to therapy. The first guy that I went to said, "I am not qualified to, to see your daughter. She's too young." So he recommended this other person to me. And so we went to see her. But he says, "I can see your son." Because my son was like 10 by then, I think. And so he saw my son, and after the first session, he came out to talk to me and said, "Well, I do believe your son has been molested," he said, "because he has an anniversary date." I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said that he can tell me exactly when it happened, where it happened, everything that was in the room. And so he said that he would be filing a report with Child Protective Services, but he never did. And anyway, so I took my daughter to this other person, and I think it was the first or second visit, she had my daughter draw a picture. And so she did. She drew a picture of herself, I guess. And I wish I had it right in front of me. I'd read it to you verbatim. She made reference to her dad. Well, she pointed to the vaginal area because the therapist was asking her how she's getting along at mom's and dad's, and then I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, they were playing with some kind of toys, and she got frustrated playing with the Legos or something. And anyway, she pointed to the picture. She pointed to the groin on the picture, and she goes, "Daddy licks me." And the therapist is like, "What?" "Yeah, when I'm at Daddy's, Daddy licks me." And the therapist says, "Where does he lick you?" And she pointed right to the vaginal area. And so that immediately, of course, rose a red flag with the therapist. And so I had to get a restraining order against him. It was temporary until we could get this straightened out to find out if what she was saying was true. Was there anything more? Oh yeah, and then she said, "Daddy put something in my pooper," and that wasn't a word that I used. It was definitely a word he used. And so I kind of started thinking that it was true, and So I went and I got was it a restraining order? Yeah. So that she didn't have to go to his house on the weekends. And because I was terrified of, leaving her alone with my daughter. And so in the interim, I don't know who did, social services, I guess, CPS was doing an investigation into him. And so their investigation was nothing really. I mean, it included speaking to all of his family and his friends and asking if he is that kind of person. And of course, they're his family, his friends. What are they going to say? Yeah. I mean, and even if they did know that he was, they were not going to say that he was that kind of person, because his family had a big name in that county. And I mean, they had been farming there for, I don't know, well over 150 years. And in fact, the house that we lived in was the original homestead. And, but this family had a lot of secrets, and there's no way they would bring shame to the family. They had a road named after them. That's how big they were in this county. So, anyway, he, trying to think of, oh yeah. So anyway, that was CPS's investigation, was just to talk to all of his family and friends. And I said, well, you really need to go talk to his ex-girlfriend, and find out what she knows, from living with him. And evidently they did, and she didn't want to get involved. She didn't want to say anything, which tells me something. She did not want her son, brought into this whole thing. So that just told me everything I needed to know. And anyway, so then they brought my daughter in for an interview, a videotaped interview with Child Protective Services. And it was about a 20-minute video. And in that 20 minutes, she didn't say anything to the therapist. And so they closed the case. They said, well, we don't see any signs of it with her. I said, you know how many times it took her to go to the therapist before she finally said something to the therapist? I said, it doesn't happen overnight. You're just going to drop the case just like that? And it was insane. And then they told me that I had to let her go back to her weekend visits with her dad. And there's no way in hell I was going to let that happen. And I panicked. I mean, I literally panicked. I mean, the rush of adrenaline that I felt, the fear that I felt from me being molested as a young girl, just, it overtook any logical thinking that I could have had I taken a time to think about it, but I didn't. And I packed, my oldest daughter who is now a teenager, was already living with her father. And so I had my son and my youngest daughter living with me. And so I just packed everything I could in the back of the pickup. I had a little tiny, I don't know what it was, if it was a Toyota or an S10 or something, I can't remember, but it had a cab on the back, a cap. Anyway, so I packed everything in there that I could possibly think of. And now by this time, I had been divorced now for a couple years. And I had actually already remarried, and I remarried to a Mexican national. Anyway, he without papers. So he suggested that we go to Mexico. And so basically that's what we did. I mean, we stopped off in the state that my mom was living in, and I knew I couldn't take my son with me, just because of financial reasons. I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, where are we going to get money, to live on? And how am I going to feed these kids? And I knew that my son would be safe at his dad's. I know that his dad was not, he wasn't the best father, but he wasn't the worst either. So I left him with my mother and told her, I said, give me 24 hours to get out of the country and then call his dad. Well, my mom didn't do that. And in fact, my son begged. He did not want to go to his dad's. He hated his father. He still does. He's 37 he's 40 now. And he still doesn't like his dad. But anyway, he begged Grandma not to call Dad, and so she didn't. And eventually, the police were knocking on her door, wondering where I was, and my daughter, and my son. And she said she didn't know. And so she got in trouble for that, because eventually they came back and they found my son there, and she she was arrested for obstruction or aiding and abetting or something. I don't know. But my bad decision ended up getting my mother involved, and getting her in trouble with the law. If she had done what I said, she wouldn't have been in trouble with the law. So I can't really take responsibility for, her lack of judgment. But it is how it played out. And anyway, so my husband and I went to Mexico, and we did everything that we could to make money. We sold tacos. We built a taco stand, and so we sold tacos in the streets. We sold snow cones during the day. So I would get up every single morning at like 4 a.m. and make homemade syrups with real fruit for the snow cones. And anyway, we made a lot of money off of that. I'm talking, not pesos, about $100 a day, just selling snow cones. And so we actually made more off the snow cones than we did the tacos. So anyway, we were down there for maybe, how long were we down there? Not long, maybe 2 months. And we ended up getting into a car accident, and I was driving. I fell asleep at the wheel, and I had broken my jaw, or dislocated my jaw. My chin was hanging off over here by my ear, and I had a big hole in my head. Oh yeah, it was right here. And so I was out of it, and my husband somehow got all of us to an ambulance. It's not like down here in the United States that you just call 911 and get an ambulance. No. So I don't know how he did it, but he got an ambulance, and they took all of us together to this big city to have them try to fix me. And anyway, after that, I made a call to my mother in the United States, and little did I know that the FBI had her phones tapped. And so they were able to find out where I was at in Mexico. And they sent this guy down. He was an ex-FBI agent, and somehow, I don't know if his badge was real or not, but it looked real to me. He came. They had been pounding. He was there with another woman, and they had been pounding on our door, and we didn't answer. And I was still sitting there wrapped with gauze around my head to hold my chin in place. Yeah, it was awful getting fixed up in Mexico. But anyway, so after, I don't know how many days, 2 or 3 days of them pounding on the door, I told my husband, go take a walk around town. And because they didn't have a picture of him, well, I didn't know that, but they only had a picture of me. And so he went walking around town and found out who they were. He went to the police station and he found out who they were. And of course, and they went to the police station, and the police didn't tell him didn't tell him anything about us. But after a couple of days later, again, I finally went out to talk to him. And the guy showed me a badge really quick. And then he introduced this lady who said that she was with Child Protective Services in Mexico City at the U.S. consulate in Mexico City. Did I know whether there was a Child Protective Services at the U.S. consulate in Mexico City? No. So I just believed her. I had no idea, and he told me he was FBI, which he wasn't. He worked for the YES group, which I can't remember what that even stands for. Youth Education and Safety, maybe. So anyway, he tried to buy my daughter from me. He says, I've got, $2,000 US dollars. If you give me your daughter, I'll give you $2,000. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but no, that's not going to happen. I said, you're going to take my daughter and you're going to put her back in the hands of the child molester. I said, that's not happening. And so he came back with, either you do what we say, or you and your husband are both going to go to Mexican prison, and your daughter is going to go to a Mexican orphanage, and you'll never see her again. And I panicked. I freaked, and I said, this took a long time. After, a lot of talking back and forth, I finally agreed. They said that she would be safe, that she would not be alone with her father, that her father was going to fly in, and she would fly back with all of them, and that a full investigation would be done before, they let her alone with him. And so I was panicked. I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I don't want my daughter in a Mexican orphanage. I know I'll never see her again because somebody will steal her. And so, yeah, we went to this hotel and we spent the night, and the next morning we got up and we went to the airport, and there he was, and they took my daughter from me and took her back to the United States. And now I had to figure out how I was going to get back to the United States, because my name, my face was all over the NCIC, I don't know, some federal database, for people. And so anyway, I made it back to the United States. Well, I'll back up a little bit. After they all got on the plane, my husband showed me this wad of money. I said, where did you get that? And he said, from Gustavo. And I said, I told him no. I said, you shouldn't have taken that money. I said, no, because now it's like I sold my kid. And I was really pissed. And But we ended up using that money to get back to the United States, and that was quite the ordeal as well, because I think we flew into, I don't know, Laredo, Monterey, somewhere around there. And anyway, we crossed the border into Laredo, Texas, in a taxi. And my Mexican husband was blonde hair, blue eyed. So he didn't look like a Mexican. And I told him, I said, here, just grab this camera and have your camera like you're just a tourist, you know? And they looked in the window and, you know, they said, American citizens? Yep. Okay, so they passed us right on through. And so the first thing we did was buy a car. And so that we could get up to the state that that I needed to go to. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to use destinations and names and all that kind of stuff, just to protect innocent people. But anyway, so we bought a car, and with that cash that he accepted, and we made it, I don't know how far, not very far, maybe 50 miles. And there was like a border checkpoint. We were in the United States, but they still had this border checkpoint in Texas. And we got through the checkpoint, but about 2 miles up the road, all of a sudden, we're getting pulled over. And somehow somebody recognized my face after we got let go. And yeah, so they came and they arrested me, and they put him in, took him back across the border. Even though we were legally married, he didn't have papers, so they took him back across the border. And it was, I'm trying to think, in Texas, so I didn't know anything about the law. You know, I'd never been in trouble with the law. I'd never been in jail. And so my first time in jail was somewhere in Texas. And they let me in front of a judge, and a judge gave me a bond. And I didn't know anything about that either, you know, so I was able to bond out if I had the money. So they had numbers in the jail where you could call, you know, a bondsman. And so I called up one, and I told him how much I needed, and I think it was like $2,500 or $1,500. I don't know. I don't remember what the bail was anymore. But he said, well, what do you have? I said, I don't have any cash. I said, I spent it all on this car. And he says, well, I'll take your car as collateral. And I said, okay. And so he took my car, and I got out of jail. And the first thing I did was go back across the border to find my husband. And I found him, and he had been in contact with his parents, who wired him a bunch of money. And so we got on a plane, and we flew to Tijuana. And once again, this time we walked across the border. And this time he was carrying, he had a sombrero on, and was carrying maybe a, what do you call those things? Piñata. And again, the lady said, now mind you, this is back in the early or mid 90s. And no, mid to late 90s. And so it was still pretty lax at the border. And so, yeah, they just, U.S. citizens, we got our driver's license out, and they're like, no, that's okay, go ahead. And so they didn't even look at our driver's license. So we made it across the border, and eventually got to where my mother was living. And then eventually I went back to the state where this was all taking place, where I had lived before I left, and yeah, and turned myself in there. And the judge in this case was a Mexican female. She was very biased against women. She hated women, and they were really pissed off that I got bailed out in Texas because they wanted to extradite me back here, and because they thought I would run again. And so anyway, I went to court, had my bail hearing, and this time in Wisconsin, they don't have bail bondsmen. Oh, I just said Wisconsin. That's great. Okay, well, so anyway, we had to pay cash. So she made it a $5,000 cash bond, and my mother forked over the money. And so I happened to be pregnant at the time when I went to jail, and I wasn't there very long, only a few days. And but I ended up losing that baby. But that's all beside the point. So it's a really long story, and so I think I'm going to stop there. So yeah, I think I'm just going to stop there, and I'll pick it back up on the next video. So if you want to hear more, of my story, then subscribe, like, and set the bell notifications so that you don't miss out on anything. Peace.